George Barry Bingham's name once echoed through every newsroom in Louisville, yet few today know the full throttle saga behind the headlines. Born in 1906 inside a mansion that smelled of ink and bourbon, Bingham inherited far more than a newspaper. He inherited the power to shape public conscience. His journey tears across early 20th century America through a brutal train wreck that killed his mother, a scandalous marriage that funneled Standard Oil millions into Kentucky coffers, and a crusade against political corruption that earned 6 Pulitzer Prizes. From launching WHAS TV and the iconic Crusade for Children telethon, to watching 2 sons die in freak accidents and a dynasty implode over 435 million, Bingham's life is a Southern Gothic epic wrapped in hot metal type. If you love true stories where ambition, tragedy, and reinvention collide, buckle up. This video unpacks the meteoric rise and explosive unraveling of a media empire that once decided what Kentuckians thought before breakfast. A black automobile idled outside a red brick mansion on Louisville's 4th Street, exhaust puffing spirals into a February chill while a newborn's wail ricocheted through plaster and parquet floors. The date was February 10, 1906, and the infant, George Barry Bingham, arrived to a household where newsprint inked every conversation. His father, Judge Robert Worth Bingham, strode daily between courthouse and newsroom, campaigning for reforms as casually as others ordered bourbon. His mother, Eleanor, cultured, fearless, channeled family wealth into libraries, orphanages, and suffrage teas. At supper, the child heard equal parts Shakespeare, city gossip, and election math. Louisville itself crackled, trolley bells, riverboat horns, and the metallic click of linotype slugs setting tomorrow's headlines. In that incubator, Barry absorbed one central truth: a story, properly told, was the most combustible substance in America. The chauffeur guided the gleaming Alco touring car out of Louisville's cobblestone streets and onto the rolling turnpike that ribboned toward Shelbyville, its brass lamps flashing in the sun like newly minted coins. It was 1913, a season when most Kentuckians still trusted a mule's sure foot over this rattling contraption of pistons and gears. Yet Robert Bingham wanted his family to sample modernity at 45 miles an hour. Eleanor sat in front, a model of Edwardian composure, her starched lace dress whispering as the wind teased its hem. She kept one gloved hand on the side rail, the other resting lightly on the wide-brimmed straw hat that protected the perfect Gibson girl coil at the nape of her neck. 7-year-old Barry, button boots dangling, hair slicked with brilliantine and maternal pride, knelt on the rear seat, inhaling the peppery tang of gasoline, a smell he would forever link to possibility. The countryside unfurled in impressionist brushstrokes, corn stalks nodding in green militancy, alfalfa fields sweetening the air, a barn roof angling like a red arrow toward heaven. A faint whistle drifted across the fields. In 1913, those whistles were background music, so common they blended with locust drones, but this one pressed Eleanor's spine into the seat. "Harlan, do you see the crossing?" she asked. The chauffeur, dabbing perspiration with a handkerchief, downshifted too late. A second whistle roared, closer, urgent, and before Harlan could find reverse, steel met steel. The interurban train punched through the Alco's side like a titan swinging a lead pipe. Barry felt every pane of safety glass shatter in violent, glittering slow motion. He later swore the splinters rang like church bells as they passed his ears. Steam hissed from the locomotive's brake cylinders, enveloping the wreck in a scalding fog that smelled of iron, hot oil, and fresh blood. When the cloud thinned, Eleanor lay crumpled over the canted dashboard. Parasol snapped in half against her ribs, her lace-soaked ruby. Barry tried to scream but found his throat locked. A terrified squeak escaped instead, the noise of a hinge refusing to turn. Within minutes, farmers sprinted from distant fields, pitchforks still in hand. They pried Barry free, afraid to pull too hard at the clavicle bones jutting beneath his torn sailor blouse. They carried his cousin, Samuel Miller, onto a blanket spread in the grass, where he would die 5 hours later, whispering the Lord's Prayer between lungfuls of red froth. The conductor paced in circles, rail cap crushed in his hands, repeating, "God help us," until a deputy wrote the phrase into his incident log for lack of anything more factual to record. Reporters from the Courier-Journal arrived before the coroner's wagon. They sketched the twisted tires, the parasol lodged like a white flag in the undercarriage, and the inconsolable judge cradling his son so tightly that Barry's boot heel left a bruise on Robert Bingham's thigh. Louisville awoke next morning to a front-page headline, "Society Tragedy, Light of the City Extinguished," and an editorial lamenting the era's reckless love affair with speed. But Barry internalized none of the purple prose. What he remembered was the metallic scent that would forever accompany nightmares, and the silence of his mother's body that looked ready to wake, yet obeyed no plea. Robert Bingham, who once quoted Longfellow at supper, began quoting only ledgers and legal codes. Grief transmuted into ambition so steely it repelled sleep. 3 years later, his courtship of Mary Lily Keenan Flagler drew lampoon cartoons in every Southern Gossip sheet. The courtship itself unfolded in tinted postcards and private Pullman cars. Robert reading Whitman aloud on a veranda in Palm Beach. Mary Lily sending baskets of gardenias north so big they required a freight bill. Their 1916 wedding in Asheville's Keenan Memorial Church was an avalanche of orchids, senators, and railroad tycoons. Barry 11 watched his father slide a diamond ring onto Mary Lily's finger, a stone rumored to cost the same as 3 Louisville duplexes, and wondered if love was measured in carats. Exactly 14 months later, Mary Lily's nurse found the heiress cold in a mahogany bed carved with cherubim Henry Flagler had imported from Florence. The next morning, Robert learned that her final codicil, penned on hotel stationery and shaky penmanship, ceded $5 million, railroad tycoon money, Standard Oil money, to him outright. North Carolina whispered murder. Private detectives inspected medicine cabinets, fingered laudanum vials, questioned coaches about unexplained bruises. One hired pathologist claimed cardiac syphilis could have been managed better. Another chalked death up to God's ledger, signed in invisible ink. Prosecutors declined to indict, but Keenan lawyers pushed civil depositions deep into winter. Through it all, Barry, now a lanky 8th grader, clipped every headline, filed them in a shoebox, and marveled. The same presses that once mourned his mother now insinuated his father into American Gothic folklore. That paradox stunned him. The elasticity of print, its power to flip saints into sinners in 12-column inches, and birthed a resolve to master the craft or be mastered by it. At Harvard in 1924, he arrived with 2 steamer trunks, one for tweed, one for books, and Kentucky bourbon he swore was medicinal. The yard smelled of damp brick, pipe tobacco, and the intellectual hubris of 20-year-olds. Barry rented a typewriter for a nickel an hour and clacked out essays on persuasive rhetoric, joining the Crimson by week 2. He roamed Wiedener's stacks, hunting Hansard debates, edited translations of Thucydides to fit column width, and memorized H.L. Mencken diatribes for fun. On weekends, he rode the Boston and Maine to Boston Common, where he would watch vaudeville barkers, coax crowds, then jot notes on cadence and timing. He wrote his honors thesis on the geometry of opinion, arguing that newspapers do not merely report the arc of events, they bend it like light through a prism. When he recited the abstract to his advisor, the professor called it brilliant, dangerous, and possibly both. Washington, D.C. the following spring felt smaller than Cambridge. Barry's desk in a junior congressional correspondence office overlooked the Capitol dome. At lunch, he wandered into press galleries just to observe which paragraphs made reporters raise eyebrows or reach for phones. He learned to decode hallway gossip into probable votes, to weigh a lobbyist's grin like a pawnbroker weighs gold. After 9 months, he concluded he would rather pull levers than lurk behind them. He resigned, bought a single Pullman ticket home, and spent the entire 30-hour ride drafting a manifesto on newspaper ethics that filled 2 stenographer pads. Back in Louisville, Christmas Eve, 1931, baptized the next chapter. Outside Christ Church Cathedral, the city's first electric street decorations glowed garlands of red and green. Inside, poinsettias banked the altar so thickly their scent overrode incense. Barry stood at the rail, wearing a double-breasted charcoal suit stitched in Boston, waiting for Mary Clifford Caperton. Her Radcliffe classmates had called her the walking thesaurus. She arrived in an ivory gown, whose satin train caught every candle flicker. When the priest asked for vows, Mary delivered hers without trembling, weaving in a line from Ovid that made the choir boys miss a cue. Their honeymoon at the Greenbrier alternated fox hunts and debates over Hemingway versus Dos Passos. On the train ride home, they outlined the skeletal editorial policy they would pursue should the Courier ever fall to Barry's stewardship. Independence above allegiance, clarity above comfort, and courage above circulation. Judge Bingham's fatal coronary in 1937 interrupted a board meeting about ink prices. Barry found his father slumped in a wing chair, dispatch boxes half opened like violated secrets. Funeral black crepe hung across the Courier's front doors, but by week's end, Barry assumed the publisher's chair. His first decree killed the practice of running pre-approved party talking points verbatim. When the state Democratic boss threatened a boycott, Barry dared him to announce it publicly. The boss backed down in 36 hours, dissuaded by whispers that the Courier's files on election bribery ran thick as a telephone book. Barry unleashed a generation of reporters on Kentucky's darkest corners. They stalked strip mine operators who torched union bunkhouses, documented school boards that sold textbooks in exchange for campaign cash, and photographed sheriffs providing protection to gambling dens. When an editor timidly suggested trimming a phrase that accused a state senator of auctioneering civic duty to the highest bidder, Barry red-penciled timid in the margin and expanded the accusation. Subscriber numbers spiked, so did bomb threats. One evening, a small dynamite charge blew a crater in the newsroom's carriage entrance. Scattered lead type spelled accidental poems under the street lamps. Barry paid for reinforced blast doors, posted a framed copy of the First Amendment on them, and invited the photo desk to shoot the installation for page 1. Yet ambition rarely traveled alone. By 1950, he faced a choice: remain Kentucky's print king or gamble on that flickering, boxy novelty called television. Engineers warned of financial sinkholes. Bankers fretted about antenna rights, tying up collateral. Barry signed anyway, partly because he'd seen Berliners huddled around Allied newsreels in 1945, and he understood hunger for moving pictures had no cure. WHAS TV launched on Thanksgiving morning. The first broadcast opened with an aerial shot of Churchill Downs, camera shivering in Kentucky's gusty November, then cut to a live studio where Barry, in bow tie, explained the station's mission: to place a civic candle in every parlor. Viewers forgave ghosting images and snowy reception because the signal came from a local voice they trusted, not a bi-coastal giant. The crusade for children began almost accidentally. A Monday budget meeting discussing airtime fillers after midnight. Barry suggested a charity telethon, patterned on one he'd seen in Paris to aid war orphans. Within 10 weeks, the station erected a plywood tote board 15 feet high. Fire chiefs volunteered ladder trucks as prop comic relief. High school bands performed Sousa marches at 3 a.m. Switchboard operators taped cotton to their bleeding knuckles between pledge calls. By dawn, Louisville had pledged $156,000, more than the city's annual parks budget. A year later, volunteers raised double. By the mid-60s, totals breached $1 million, and parents whose children received polio braces sent thank you notes in script so shaky yet grateful they made even hard-bitten copy editors misty. Barry's war years always hovered as a kind of moral compass. Drafted but unwilling to ride a desk, he requested field artillery. At Fort Sill, he learned to calculate shell trajectories with slide rules and instinct. In Sicily, he watched a mountain village explode under German counter-battery fire after an American spotting mistake and resolved that precision in communication could save lives as surely as precision in powder charges. He kept a foxhole diary, noting that clarity under pressure requires rehearsal in peace, a maxim he later recited to rookie reporters trembling before hostile sheriffs. When the bullets ceased, the State Department realized his blend of diplomacy and logistic stubbornness was ideal for the Marshall Plan. In Le Havre, he paced damp docks at dawn, detailing which cranes should unload coal first lest French rail schedules seize. In Rouen, he charmed nuns into converting monastery warehouses into medical supply depots. Once, facing a shipment bottleneck, he dashed off a column-length cable to Washington, titled "Tractors Are Foreign Policy," persuading bureaucrats that nothing disarms communism like a full granary. France awarded him the Legion of Honor. He mailed the ribbon home in a plain envelope with a note. Thread this into the family quilt. Domestic joy was unruly, like all joys worth having. Worth, the eldest, carried notebooks everywhere, sketching courtroom dramas at age 10. Barry Jr. preferred microscopes to typewriters, forever dissecting crawdads in the carriage house sink. Sally hoarded notebooks of verse, once reciting Emily Dickinson so fiercely that a governess quaked. Eleanor, Noni, could dismantle a carburetor in 50 minutes flat and reassemble it while quoting Cicero. Jonathan, the caboose child, sang Irish ballads off-key yet heartbreakingly sincere. Sundays at Glenview began with buttery biscuits, moved to blistering debates over whether Faulkner modeled Snopes villains on real Kentucky families, and ended with touch football where Barry refused to ease tackles just because he wore a publisher's hat Monday through Friday. 4th of July, 1964, tested the foundation. Jonathan, the baby at 22, decided the estate's oaks needed pruning before the evening fireworks. He climbed a ladder clutching a 13-foot aluminum pole. No one noticed the high-voltage line camouflaged in foliage. When metal met current, a blue snap lit the lawn, and Jonathan crumpled, pulseless, before the pole clattered. Family friends reached him within minutes. No prayer reversed the surge. Fireworks over the Ohio boomed that night, but Glenview's windows stayed shut. Mary felt as though the blast rewired gravity itself. Barry took the loss like shrapnel he couldn't extract. 2 summers afterward, tragedy doubled down. Worth, eldest son, Pulitzer-winning wunderkind, piloted a station wagon across Nantucket with a surfboard protruding like a flag of freedom. One lurch, one parked car, and the board jackknifed, severing his carotid. Emergency crews found him slumped, hands still on the wheel. Reporters who had taken Worth's calls hours earlier now typed obituaries, struggling to dress a freak accident in sober diction. At Glenview, Barry opened the telegram, reread it, then walked to the newspaper morgue and pulled every story Worth had ever filed. He spread them across the marble foyer floor like enormous condolence cards. Later, he would say that grief becomes less an emotion than a geography. You never leave, you just learn side streets. Business offered no exile. In 1971, he ceded publisher duties to Barry Jr., a Yale-trained Marine with a poet's eye, and unknown to him then, cancerous lymph nodes. Doctors muttered, Hodgkin's. Nurses whispered remission odds. Radiation eventually shrank the tumors, but the diagnosis left Junior with a haunted brightness as though every sunrise might be on loan. Meanwhile, Sally, a playwright, and Eleanor, a magazine editor, questioned why sons inherited control while daughters inherited etiquette lessons. They demanded board seats, then voting stock, then parity. Negotiations curdled. At one board meeting, Eleanor slammed a notebook so hard pens bounced. At another, Sally compared the newsroom to a kingdom ruled by male primogeniture in Brooks Brothers suits. The feud slid from boardroom corridors into front-page spectacle when Sally calculated her 15% stake at $32 million and refused anything less. Junior countered $26.3 million. Attorneys multiplied like jackrabbits. The New York Times ran an A-section dissection titled Dynasty on the Ohio, calling the saga Faulkner without the iambic. Local columnists, edgy with schadenfreude, mocked Glenview as Grudgeview. Barry Sr., now late 70s, convened summit dinners heavy with silverware and silence. He reminded the heirs that the family motto was integrity in all things. Sally reportedly responded, integrity also pays compound interest. While siblings weaponized spreadsheets, an author in New Orleans sharpened a different blade. David Leon Chandler, researching the Binghams of Louisville, dredged every rumor surrounding Mary Lily's 1917 death. His draft suggested Robert Worth Bingham ignored his wealthy wife's syphilitic heart, maybe expedited it with morphine, then pocketed millions. In 1987, galleys circulated. Barry Sr., incensed, hired libel specialists and argued the pages defamed both living and dead Binghams. Federal judges parodying First Amendment scripture. Barry himself had once crusaded for let the presses roll, bookstores stocked the volume under true crime, and cocktail chatter about arsenic dosages spiked overnight. Louisville bartenders invented the codicil, 2 parts bourbon, 1 part vermouth, splash of bitters, garnish with orange peel, and a conspiracy theory. January 1986 unfurled one final lightning bolt. Tired of internecine trench warfare, Barry and Mary, who controlled 95% of the company's voting stock, summoned lawyers at dawn and signed away their inheritance. Newspapers, radio towers, TV studio, printing presses, everything to Gannett for $435.8 million. The deal stunned observers the way a courthouse clock chiming midnight in mid-afternoon would. Barry Jr. resigned in protest minutes after the ink dried, telling reporters the sale burned the soul out of the brand. Newsroom veterans wept quietly. Some ripped off press passes like wartime deserters, removing insignia. In Glenview's library, Sally and Eleanor stared at each other across Persian rugs, unsure whether victory smelled like triumph or wildfire. Then came the medical coup de grace. Late 1987 neurologists pronounced glioblastoma, the brain tumor that treats time like confetti. Surgery offered slivers of hope. Radiation offered exhaustion. Barry chose a grueling regimen, still attending editorial board meetings between infusions, quoting Churchill to interns, KBO, keep buggering on. Eventually, morphine replaced coffee, and his authoritative baritone thinned to a pencil scratch? On August 6, 1988, cerebral hemorrhage shoved him into a coma. 9 days later at 12:07 a.m., he exhaled for the last time. Outside, the Ohio River kept its unbroken, indifferent current. Funeral Thursday. Louisville simmered under August humidity thick enough to paste cuffs to wrists. 1,000 mourners filed past the coffin. Governors, Pulitzer winners, janitors, weather girls, rival publishers grudgingly respectful. Governor Burt Combs called Barry the conscience loaned to Kentucky. A linotype operator said he never walked past a pressman without tipping his hat. A retired rival admitted, damned if he didn't make me rewrite my copy twice. Pipe organ chords swelled. Bagpipes outside played Amazing Grace, honoring the Scottish roots Barry often referenced when reminding staff to swing broadswords, not butter knives. When the cortege reached Cave Hill Cemetery, Mary placed a single Courier-Journal press badge atop the casket, employee number 1. The headstone by Barry's instruction was modest, name, dates, and the Courier's 5-point star logo carved thumbnail small. Executors soon unveiled the will, $100 million after taxes, parceled to universities, philosophy publishers, art museums, and, fittingly, the Crusade for Children's Endowment. Louisville embankments celebrated with fireworks previously ordered for Jonathan's ill-fated 4th, finally detonated in tribute instead of tragedy. After the estate lawyers locked their briefcases, a different reckoning materialized. Could a family splintered by cash and headlines preserve the ideals that once bound them? Under Gannett, the Courier-Journal grabbed occasional Pulitzers, but traded investigative sprawl for budget spreadsheets. Was TV modernized to Doppler radar and YouTube teasers? The Crusade, however, endured. Each June, volunteers still shake firefighter boots outside grocery stores, and Kentuckians still drop wrinkled dollars, unconsciously reenacting a ritual one man invented to make children safer than his own turned out to be. Drive past Glenview today and you'll spot for sale placards where magnolias once hid tennis courts. Real estate agents downplay scandal and highlight river views. Yet late at night, locals swear they see a porch light flicker on, as if someone inside still roams the study, checking column leads, debating verbs. Maybe it's just faulty wiring. Maybe dynastic ghosts obey no zoning codes.